Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm Rebecca Lawrence and this is Voices. In this set of interviews, I will be focusing on issues of inclusion, diversity and allyship through intimate conversations with wine industry professionals from all over the globe. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. Any amount helps us cover equipment, production and publication costs, and remember to subscribe and rate our show wherever you tune in.
This episode is proudly sponsored by Vivino, the world's largest online wine marketplace. The Vivino app makes it easy to choose wine. Enjoy expert team support, door-to-door delivery, and honest wine reviews to help you choose the perfect wine for every occasion. Vivino. Download the app on Apple or Android and discover an easier way to choose wine.
Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. This is the Voices series with me, Rebecca Lawrence. This week, I'm honoured to be joined by Master of Wine, Martin Reyes. Welcome to the podcast, Martin.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for having me.
So, I really don't know where to start because you're not only currently doing so much, we've already talked a little bit off pod about how much stuff you're doing, but you've done so much already. You make wine, you write papers, you educate, speak, judge. I heard a rumor that you're coming up fluent in 5 languages. So let's start with what brought you to the wine industry. An easy start.
That's a story it's fun to relive because you don't know at the time, right? It was in college. It was a Parisian dinner. There was an exchange program, and it was at the time you're 20 and you find the thrill of being studying in Paris, and then this dinner with this thrilling, intoxicating conviviality around wine. I'd never laughed so much with friends at a table with the amount of food there, and there's something special about that kind of buzz that was very different than what you think of as a college kid, right? Either drinking shots or having beers with your buddies, watching TV. This was something special and it was something magical. And I'll never forget that. And that has what drove me to get into wine just as a consumer way back when I was in college.
Yeah, I loved the different spaces that wine created for me when I first started getting into wine. That familial, convivial kind of approach to being around a table when there's wine on it with wine people is just so attractive. Yeah.
I've often said more recently as we've matured in our virtual conversation spaces, podcasts and interviews, throughout the COVID and post-COVID. And it's time for reflection because you sit there in front of a mic and you think and you ponder these things a bit more deeply, right? And you recognize, I've learned anyways, really about to how to articulate what I found so magical about it. And there's when you drink wine with food and friends or family, you become more honest, right? And in that honesty, you talk to the person across the table, you become more vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, you can see each other, you become connected, you open yourself, not just to their point of view, but they open up to you. And in that, there's that bridge, that grace that is added, that touch of magic, touch of grace that's added to that moment, whether it's a special event moment or just a casual time. I think that's what I experienced back in Paris, and that's what we continue, you and I, and hundreds and thousands of people and millions of people that enjoy wine. That's why it retains its persistent human gracefulness throughout forever, I think.
That's such a beautiful way of putting it. I hadn't thought about it in that context, but you're right, that vulnerability that happens so easily and naturally is a real asset to those interactions. So we've got limited time, so I'm going to dive straight in to some of the stuff you've been doing. Maybe we should start with the actual product, so wine. You're currently directing production at Peter Paul Wines. You also have a growing portfolio with Reyes Selections. So what are you looking for when you make or select a wine?
Well, the last night was our first harvest for Bacigalupi Chardonnay in Russian River. So I'm operating on caffeine and giddiness of neglected dreams. And that question comes up. It comes up often, like, when do I pick? When do we what are we doing here, right? What is our production ethos? And I think very briefly, in a succinct manner, I'd say that we do. So the winery is called Peter Paul Wines. That's his name. He's my boss. He's from the East Coast in New Hampshire. And he brought me on in 2016. That's its own whole nother story you could look at on our website. But it's about thoughtfulness. It's about thoughtful production, but also logical decisions over the romantic ones, which I know is not a popular idea of wine. When we talked about this grace and magic at the dinner table, right? And all of a sudden you ask, well, what about what's your driving force for Peter Paul? I recognize that it is a little bit of a reality check, but it's business, thoughtful business and viticultural decisions can produce high quality if your heart is in the right place. So, for instance, I would say that stylistically, with one being an anemic, pale, insipid, boring wine from who knows where, right? And a 10 in terms of style and power, and 10 being this overwrought, extracted, dense, ponderous kind of wine. We're probably somewhere stylistically in terms of amplitude, somewhere around the 7 or 8, right? Maybe even 9. California, Napa, and Sonoma are known, whether cynically or celebratorily, as very rich and relatively denser wines. We do accept that we have a sunny temperament of Northern California coast, but we choose Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Cabernet that we retain the refined elements of each grape's European heritage. We look for a proper balance, even in that amplitude of fruit, of savor, and structure, without being overwrought. So we do deliver richness and joy while still saying please and thank you. That's Peter Paul.
I'm desperate for a glass of wine now.
Sure. No, me too, actually, even though it's 9 a.m.
This is the problem with a podcast. We're not sitting around a table. We're thousands of miles away from each other.
Right, exactly.
Next time you bring the wine.
I will.
So let's talk a little bit about your writing. You wrote a very successful paper, The Rise of the Consumer Critic and Its Impact on Purchasing Behavior. I believe that was part of your research dissertation for the Master of Wine qualification. It's won an award. Very, very cool. But I heard a rumor about an upcoming book project. Maybe you could share that with our listeners.
Yes. I think, I'm shifting I have been shifting for some time through conversations and projects with clients through my own company, Reyes Wine Group. In particular, one client, Spottswoode Winery, that I should mention, there in St. Helena. And a couple of years ago, they tasked me to address the climate action, right, in the face of climate change in the wine industry. And that really shifted my ethos and my direction for my company and for my focus in what topics I would be researching or developing, both for business reasons as well as for writing. The topic really is, and the idea is with Anna Chilton, who this is really her idea, and she's reached out to me, and we're going to be collaborating on a book on the sustainability of the wine trade, wine business, wine production, everything. We want to think about it as a handbook for anybody who can pick up the cause of what action a person, whether it's a vintner or a cooper or a merchant or a retailer or a marketer, or a tasting room manager or a viticulturalist, what are what are we doing? What can we do, and how? And what are the resources to develop a person's own wine industry, person's own path towards sustainability and the resilience of our trade. So that's the direction that I'm going to now. And I have Spottswoode Winery in St. Helena, who continues to be a client and who I work with and probably will, hopefully, for a long time. I credit them for lighting this fire. I've become kind of a zealot of sustainability in wine and in personal. I'm looking down at my socks right now. They're like, they're true zero waste certified, non-dye, minimal waste, B Corp certified. There's this. You start to act and purchase your way in that's in line with your professional direction too, I think, to some degree.
It sounds like the book's going to have a real 360 approach to it, that you're not just looking at sustainability in the vineyard, but at all levels. And one, I think that's something that we really need to make people aware of in the industry, that when we talk about sustainability in the wine industry, it's not just what's going on at the winery in the vineyard. It's every decision that's made from being in the winery to buying the bottle of wine and then taking it home and consuming it. And that's something that I think this industry sorely needs, and needs a voice such as someone like yourself to sort of say, this is possible and we're going to tell you how to do it.
You took the words out of my mouth, and there is a chorus of people. There's an army of zealots across the globe who are deeply invested in this topic and who are working within their communities, South Africa, New Zealand, of course, California, all over the place. Every region in wine is having a reckoning with this topic. Our objective really is to give a snapshot, and then also be a space where the conversation can continue to grow and everyone can recognize what the whole world is doing. So yeah, the best thing I think for the industry is for us to recognize how much of a role everybody plays, like you said, from the viticulturalist, the vineyard manager, production, bottling lines, the weight of the bottles, the consumer themselves choosing to buy and support wineries that are certified Napa Green, right? There's quality in Napa is great. But if you then say, where is your logo that certifies that you are, a Napa Green vineyard, Napa Green winery? And also there is a resistance and there's a shift around the idea of greenwashing. There is a change that's happening. It's not, there's a lot of preconceptions that are also being dissolved over time. This conversation could have, and it has had, multiple conferences across multiple organizations for multiple days, and we're just scratching the surface, Rebecca. But I think there's a lot to be had. So thanks for bringing that up. It's a special thing for me.
And the 360 approach kind of also mirrors your role in the industry and because you've been someone who's touched on so many different aspects, like I sort of hinted at the beginning. You write your work, you have a portfolio, you have your own company, you're judging, and you also educate. And I was particularly tickled by the fact that it says on the Reyes Wine Group website that in your spare time, you also educate. So I have to admit, one, how on earth do you have spare time? I believe this must be a myth, that you have some kind of magical device that's giving you more time. But obviously, all joking aside, it demonstrates how important education is to you. So I wanted to kind of dive into this a little bit and see if you could talk about why it's been so important for you to continue to educate, given everything else you have going on.
I think it starts as a child. It started for me as a child, a lower class immigrant upbringing. My family is from Mexico, and I was born here in San Diego. It's not an obvious background for international wine career, right? But in particular, my dad's contortionist efforts for proper schooling irrevocably changed my life in a way that I could only see now as an adult. His meager salary as a park maintenance worker allowed me to attend a 4-year university, and not overly meant for families like mine, right? Quote unquote, that kind of thing. And so looking back, what did education do? Well, now as an adult, you say, okay, well, I recognize now that I'm more cogent about the topic, this is a space where discrepancies of access exist, and they continue to perpetuate those discrepancies of access, right? You might want to call it academic privilege. So for instance, number one, you gain knowledge, right? Competency, especially in writing or critical analysis. I still don't think of myself as a master of wine. I think of myself as a master of somebody who knows how to ask the right questions about wine. That's the word master and wine are really bookends around the process of just thinking, of knowing you don't know the answers, but learning to ask the right questions and that critical awareness, right? That's to me one of the values of education. And then secondly, building your network. The friendships you call on later, and the people who who went through the path of WSET or diploma, to the friends that you had in the programs, whether in school, in college, university, and in wine, they remain your friends. And then when you grow into your careers, And that network helps your own path in your own business, whatever that business may be, right? And thirdly, the feelings of empowerment, right? You're emboldened, the education, the credentials, the graduate courses, they embolden you to assume that other things are possible, right? The other things you want to say, like whether that's starting a new business or making wine, or even changing a tire, or even getting out of a pickle. Many pickles I'm getting myself into. Some of them I don't really relish, by the way.
Great dad joke. Thank you.
You're welcome. But I've said to myself more than once since 2018, if I did the MW, I can do this. If I did the MW, I can do this. And you calm yourself down and say, wow, okay, I did that. This is difficult, but if I did that, I can do this. And you recall those feelings of empowerment. So those are the things, those are the reasons why at the core education was so important to me. And in wine, education played out in much the same way, but for a little bit more of an insidious reason. Education, like the WSET or anything else. I know if the WSET's listening, WSET, pardon me, the proper expression. it enables a person of color in the US. We're talking about the US now, right? And maybe globally, forces at work, tectonic plates outside the US, to be taken more seriously. And if you view the systemic racism or discrimination or negative stereotypes as the opposite type of currency, they take your value away, then the credential currency allows you to spend it during transactions with others in wine, and you come out a little ahead each time. So in other words, the value provided by education and wine in particular is like a buffer zone of sorts against the onslaught of stereotypes. And it was true for me, and I believe it's true for anybody who takes on wine education as part of their career.
I completely agree about both education as a whole and wine education. And I was similarly inspired to be involved in education because of my father and because of what I saw him doing in education. And I just think it's so important to kind of, like you said, the currency that it gives you in your interactions. It's not necessarily a bit about, being quote unquote more intelligent than someone else. It's the interactions you can have, the doors that it can open for you, the different perspectives it can give you on the world. And that was particularly the case for me whilst starting my wine education, is seeing people come from completely different perspectives, joined together by this thing that was wine, giving me new thoughts about the world that was around me. Not just about wine, but about how I experienced the world in general. And I was very lucky to experience that in London, which is relatively multicultural as wine goes. And that just opened my eyes to all sorts of things that were happening in the wine industry and in the culture that I was part of in London. And I wouldn't have had that if I hadn't have started my diploma in London, for example. So a perfect segue to talk about Wine Unify, an association that you co-founded and really has education at its heart. Indeed, you have the Wine Unify Education Award Program. So how did that come about? Was that just a sort of natural progression of your thoughts about education and wine education and representation?
Well, the heart of Wine Unify, and I co-founded it, but it was definitely not my baby. This belongs to all of us. The co-founders, three of us: Mary Margaret McCamick, also a master of wine, and she's based in California, and she is an educator by trade. Before she was in the wine business, she was a teacher. And D. Lynn Proctor, a very well-known individual. He a black wine professional and a brilliant mind. We three of us were brought together. Mary Margaret knew him. I knew Mary Margaret, but then I've got to know Dylan. And over the past few, well, it's been about a year and a half now, I think. But the bottom line is we recognized the power of education, its empowerment, right? And each of us had our own relationship with education and with wine, and knowing how what we just described a few minutes ago, how that plays out in wine. And you look first, wine already is an intimidating thing, right? For anybody who comes into it, right? And that education helps some of that solvent, right, against that. But there's a second level of intimidation if you are, in the US at least, a person of color, whether Black, Asian, Latino, Native American, whatever that is. You have this second area where it's viewed, rightly or wrongly, as a white man's drink or a white person's libation, right? I know we beautifully so. This is changing. If anyone takes a look out there in either social medias or virtual spaces or white education, there's a tectonic shift happening now. But and there's a lot more to be done. But the point is that we were part of, and we are part of that conversation where we are facilitating the access. We're bringing. It's one thing to say we want more diversity in wine, which we all do, but diversity does not automatically mean inclusion, right? You can accept people of color into your program, whether it's UC Davis or WSET, but do they really feel welcomed? Well, maybe not. So, and do they feel like they have role models or mentors that they can speak to about this course, about this test, about breaking into the wine industry, about building your resume, or about going after that job, or the kinds of things that are normally a career in wine are frankly intimidating. They take on another level of intimidation when you're a sommelier at a fancy restaurant and you're a Black sommelier and you are approaching a table of white wealthy bankers, right, who are drinking expensive wine and who are going to look at you. Right, this is in the person's head, like me, as a source of authority as a point of authority on this. I'm going to swallow a little bit, right, before I approach the table, no matter what color you are, right, and no matter what background or what race or what abilities you have. So, and that is part of what Wine Unify wants to do. So we offer funds, or sometimes it's funding too, right? So these wine programs are expensive. So we offer funding and financial support for people who identify as a person of color they can apply through wineunify.org in the US, and they not only receive the funds to apply for a WSET, but we also provide a degree of mentorship of that, the building of that sense of inclusion, but also a sense of community. The fourth part of education that is the most meaningful one is now time to give back. It's time to look back and say, who else can we bring forward? And step aside.
So I've got a couple more questions because I do want to touch on, I'm sorry, you are a master of wine. We have to talk about it because this is an incredible accolade. And you are the first Mexican American to hold the position. So I wanted to talk about a couple of those things. So first, I was really intrigued because I know you very deliberately chose the Master of Wine path rather than the Court of Master, or the Court of Sommeliers as they are now known, which has historically been a more coveted title, I think, in the US. So why did you make that decision to go down the MW, not the MS route?
You're absolutely right, Rebecca, that in the US, the MS, Master Sommelier, as a title is historically known, is the more coveted one. Well, back then, when I first started in wine, 2004, 2002, but then 4 and 5 is when I thought, oh, like there's these credentials, these certifications that you can work towards to, as a skinny brown kid on the sales floor of a high-powered retail shop, K&L in California. It was clear to me that I wanted to continue the education. That is the touch point there for me to decide. Okay, well, what is out there? And you look at the MS, and simple reasons back then. Before the wine trade, I was a shitty bartender. I was good at making drinks, margaritas, but I was very slow, and I couldn't keep up with the demand. So, I didn't. I knew that the restaurant trade was not for me. The MS is one that is deliberately in hospitality and the restaurant trade, which is a huge force in the US, massive force. When I found out about the MW, I thought, oh my goodness, that's the place. It's a generalist. It is an academic. It's not just academic, but it has an academic view. It is involved in viticulture, vinification, the business of wine, contemporary issues, and you don't have to know a lick about restaurant work to get down that path. And I still spill wine at the at the dinner table on accident, and that's just, you know what I mean, like service and the whole showmanship. I'm just not good at that. I'm also not really patient with people over, you know, that like the immediate, hey, nice to meet you. But then if they ask questions about wine, there are people who are much better at hospitality consistently long term than I am. So initially, it was very clear that the MW was my path, long term goal than the MS back then. Now, though, I think there's been a shift in the US, at least in the past generation, where, look, you know, Rebecca, what drives a lot of my work is to power the underdogs and that's what propelled me into Wine Unify. I was an underdog when I went to a 4-year university, right? When all the power dynamics, that's what drives my work and my projects. Sustainability itself is an underdog. It is not a sexy topic. You'd go to, a Chateauneuf de Pop tasting 9 times out of 10, as opposed to what are we going to do to save to save the Tavel region from being from disappearing because it's too warm in the south of France. That's not a sexy topic. So that itself is an underdog, you know. But anyways, so the MW itself is an underdog in the US, and I think it's when you say the question you pose, it's fair on the surface, but beyond that, it's like why go down one path versus the other? Well, you know, some people want to be movie directors, others want to be movie stars, and if I've often made this analogy, an MS is like a movie star and a wine star, really, and an MW is like a movie director, a little bit behind the scenes, not really as the celebrity is a little bit more inconnu, right? And we're talking about in the US here. And so the path before us in wine is diverse. You could be a winemaker, an exporter, sales and marketing, branding, enologist, retailer, and writer, and a restaurateur, right? So you're right that being in the US these days, I want to fight against the preconception that if you say, oh, you're in wine, oh, that means you must be a sommelier. Well, maybe, but you don't have to be. You know, what if I'm not good in restaurants? What if I don't want to do tableside service? What else is there? I wanted to be in a world of wine outside of restaurants, to live it and breathe it as we all do, just not with a suit and a pin. And the irony is that the IMW, the Institute of Masters of Wine, helped create the Court of Master Sommeliers way back in the I think it was late 60s or 70s. And yeah, you're right. In the US, it's shocking to many that to hear that there is this other pinnacle, right? That the hardest wine test in the world isn't just one; it could be one of 2. So I do acknowledge that I want to fight against to resist against conflating being in the hospitality and restaurant business in the U.S. is being in the wine industry. It's not just that, you know. 1 out of every 5 bottles in the U.S. is sold in restaurants. 4 out of every 5 are not. So sometimes we need to talk about diversity in our careers as well. So I'm happy you brought it up, but and I don't want to. I'm not bad mouthing. I do not want to badmouth. I have many friends who are MSs, and I probably could have chosen that at some point. And frankly, I think that it's deeply fearful of the exam. So kudos to those who have that special trait. There is magic to that service. There is magic to that trade. All I'm saying is that is one of the paths that one can take, and it's important for us to acknowledge the other paths that exist. And frankly, I think they got themselves in the trouble. The court did, in part because the power dynamic was so concentrated, right, within the organization and those who have the top title. That eventually power breeds potentially what's the word taking advantage of that power can produce unfortunate results. So I think that the since we're touching on the subject now briefly, I think that the Court of Master Sommeliers will be better and will grow and will realign its true path forward. I really believe so. Kind of like the Austrian wine trade did in the 1980s after the quote unquote radiator fluid scandal, right? Now Austria is a badass. So I think the same thing is true there, but we all rise together. That's my short answer.
I think it's a really great opportunity to show people that you don't have to take the path that someone else has taken. Just because that's the path that lots of people look to doesn't mean that that's necessarily the path for you. And you are able to make your own decisions about exactly how you want your position in the wine industry to be. And I think that's also a very important part of diversifying our approach to the industry, because, like you say, so many people go, oh, you're in wine, so you're a sommelier. And I get that all the time. I was like, you do not want to see me open and pour a bottle of wine. Like, honestly, that's a hot mess. I cannot be in service. It's a skill, but it's one I do not have. And they're like, oh, so you're in the MW program. And I'm like, no, actually, that's just not for me. That, I came out of the diploma and I was like, for now, that's not for me. And that, it's just people taking different paths. There's a role for everyone in the industry because there's so many of them. And that's one of the great things about the wine industry is there are so many things you could be doing to just share your love of wine with other people.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca.
So it is the Italian Wine Podcast.
Yes, it is.
It would be remiss of me not to ask at least one question about Italian wine. Otherwise, if I don't, Stevie's going to kill me. I always forget because I get myself wrapped up in these amazing conversations and I need to bring it back to the Italian wine. So you have several Italian wine producers as part of the Reyes Selection. I wondered if there are any particular wines or regions that you're looking to add or maybe that you're excited about right now.
Well, my market currently is the Pennsylvania market, which is a monopoly in the U.S. So right now I've got 3 producers, Terra Stregata in the Campania region, who is a multiple-time Trevichieri winner for their Falanghina, and Cascina del Pozzo and Claudia Lario in Piemonte. They're known for their Barbera and Dolcetto, respectively. But I am I'm working to represent and hopefully bring into the market two that I love their wines, Espagnol, Prosecco, and it's a family owned. Actually, they have a fair amount of acreage, or excuse me, hectares in the European parlance, that they control. I think 30 or 40, which is quite significant. But so they're fairly close to what one would consider an estate grown prosecco, not very expensive and just beautifully made and beautifully packaged prosecco that the family, the Spaniel family, create. And so my hope is that, knock on wood, that we get them into our Pennsylvania market. And then Franco Conterno, I know Daniele Conterno, the son, and he's a dynamic individual. And they're all their wines, their Langhe, their Nascetta, their Langhe Rosso, their Barbera d'Alba, and their multiple experiential Barolo from Sietiani all the way down to the Barolo Normale. Fantastic. I mean, ultimately fantastic, compelling Barolo. Recently I did, I participated in a I Vini del Piemonte. There's an association of Piedmont producers as a grassroots association to communicate, Piedmont to export markets. And Deborah Parker Wong, a friend of mine and a brilliant educator and wine communicator and journalist, she invited me to be a participant of this of the I Vini del Piemonte podcast around climate change and the climate crisis with Piemonte producers. And there was one producer, they were all compelling, by the way, including Daniele Conterno of the Franco Conterno was also there by coincidence. Spanna Winery. They not only make fantastic whites, by the way, but their approach and their optimism around the changing climate of Piedmont and the way in which they collaborate and the way in which they share information and the way in which they focus on what matters, not just quality, but also their impact on their relationship to nature, their awareness and attentiveness to the greenhouse gas emissions, to water management, is a complete picture. So Spanna to me is somebody that I want to reach out to. You're the first person I've told this. And when this question came up, I'm like, who else would I? And I'm like, well, they came to mind. They don't even know, right? So I want to reach out to them through Deborah if I can. And maybe have them join the International Wineries for Climate Action, an association that I work a little bit with through Spottswoode, my client here in St. Helena, because that winery can be can continue to be a clarion call to the rest of not just Piemonte but also the wine industry about thinking holistically about one's role, not just making quality wine anymore, but being a qualitatively compelling steward of your land, of nature, right? And most of these wineries, probably all of them, have that long-term relationship with nature, with their soil, with their land. So it's a natural extension, and probably they're all thinking about this. But Spana has data, they have knowledge, they have practices that can then spread, right? And again, that being fiercely collaborative is the way forward for all of us to build resilience in our trade, top to bottom. So that's a long answer to your question about who I'm promoting and who I'm thinking about and who I eventually want to have a relationship with in the wine trade for Italy.
They're a great example for you because not only are they doing all that work, but their wines are just utterly delicious. So they demonstrate that you can do all of this great work and still produce exceptional wines.
Yes, exactly.
Martin Reyes, thank you so much for joining me on the Italian Wine Podcast today. I'm sure we could talk all evening, but we can't, unfortunately. So where can our listeners find you online or on social media to see more of what you're doing?
Sure. There's a few things. ReyesWinegroup.com. That's my company. And that's where you can go first. So I go to ReyesWinegroup.com. There's a page there dedicated to dad humor, dad jokes. I'm a dad humorist or a curator of or purveyor of or creator of, or I don't know, it's just a little bit of humor there for us to not take ourselves too seriously. And from there, you can go to peterpaulwines.com. That's the winery that I manage full-time, peterpaulwines.com. wineunify.org is an association that we talked about earlier, and that's a place you can find me there too. I'm also a co-host for a wine podcast, actually food and wine podcast called The Four Top with Catherine Cole. So I think it's thefourtop.org or fourtop.org. And on social media, you can find me at reyeswine.mw on Instagram in particular. Instagram, and I think the same thing on Facebook or whatever, yeah.
Thank you to everyone for listening. Don't forget to follow us on social media, subscribe, and of course, donate on the website to make sure we can keep these great conversations flowing. Martin, thank you once again.
Thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful evening. It's great talking to you.
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, chin chin.
Hi guys, I'm Joy Livingston and I am the producer of the Italian Wine Podcast. Thank you for listening. We are the only wine podcast that has been doing a daily show since the pandemic began. This is a labor of love and we are committed to bringing you free content every day. Of course, this takes time and effort, not to mention the cost of equipment, production, and editing. We would be grateful for your donations, suggestions, requests, and ideas. For more information on how to get in touch, go to ItalianWinePodcast.com.